My name is Miss Shaw from the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. Today, I am going to be talking to you guys about the Bill of Rights and how the Bill of Rights connects to President Kennedy. So I'm going to do a screen share after I'm going to share with you guys the handout. I'm not sure if you guys received the handout that was provided earlier. Does it give me just a second? If you guys need the handout, let me know and we'll be able to, oh, thank you, Edgewood, good job. If you guys need it, let me know. The handout is something that you can fill out for your own organizational help to help you remember the amendments later on and also their connections to President Kennedy. So let me do a quick screen share. All right, so again, my name is Maria Shaw. I am the museum education specialist here. I used to be a teacher, so I applaud you brave teachers out there having your whole class participate in a Zoom. I want to first talk about the 6th Floor Museum itself, and we're going to be discussing the Bill of Rights as it's connected to President Kennedy, but in order to understand that, you're going to need to have some context. So I'm going to provide you guys some context about the 6th Floor Museum itself. This is the 6th Floor Museum as it looks today. And this is how the 6th Floor Museum looked in 1963. The 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza is the historic site of the assassination of President Kennedy. On November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was on the campaign trail campaigning for the presidential election of 1964. The presidential motorcade went down Elm Street. As you can see, the street that's right in front of the newer building image, that's Elm Street. And as the president's motorcade went down Elm Street, 3 shots were fired from above, and 3 bullet casings were discovered on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Today, this is known as the 6th Floor Museum. The president was shot at 12:30 in the afternoon and was rushed to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. He was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Later that same day, a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippett, was also shot and unfortunately killed. Eyewitnesses in the area said that a man by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald was the man who shot the officer. The FBI determined that Oswald was also the shooter from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Oswald was discovered to be someone who worked there, and he had planned this out. But unfortunately, before he could go to trial, while he was still under police custody, he was shot by a man named Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was a Dallas nightclub owner who broke into the jail and shot Oswald, and Ruby was immediately taken into custody. Jack Ruby said that the reason that he shot Oswald was to reduce the suffering of the First Lady. Oswald was pronounced dead at Parkland Hospital, the same hospital that President Kennedy had gone to in Dallas at 1 p.m., the same time on November 24th, 1963. So ironically, exactly 2 days after President Kennedy was assassinated, Oswald was pronounced dead as well. With this context, let us now talk about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And it's important to understand that the Constitution is a living document. So if something is a living document, that means it can be continuously updated or edited. That means amendments can be added, amendments can be removed, or amendments can be reinterpreted. let us first go through the first couple of amendments, and then I'll provide you guys examples to the connections with President Kennedy. So the First Amendment is the freedom of religion, speech, assembly, petition, and press. These are the 5 elements of the First Amendment. And the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Essentially, it's saying that the American people have these 5 freedoms. If you guys have any questions about any of these freedoms, please feel free to mention it in the chat. Now, how does this connect to President Kennedy? In the fall of 1963, approximately 500 flyers were created that were a wanted for treason flyer, and they were distributed by anti-Kennedy propagandists in downtown Dallas prior to Kennedy's arrival in November 1963. And here is an image of the flyer itself. The folks that made these flyers were allowed to because of their First Amendment right of freedom of speech. Now let's go on to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. It is in the Constitution listed as a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, for the year 1963, this is relevant because in the February 1963 American Rifleman magazine, it was a popular magazine at the time, they included a coupon that showed a couple of different rifles that was on sale. One of these rifles was the one that Lee Harvey Oswald used and ordered in order to assassinate the president. According to the Second Amendment, he was able to lawfully, legally purchase a weapon. Now, the Third Amendment is no quartering of troops. Many people feel that the Third Amendment is not as important today. It states that no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house. The term quartered essentially means enter someone's house, go in there, live there, spend a couple of days there. Now, they can't do that without the consent of the owner. The term consent means without the permission of the owner. So, nor in times of war, but in a manner to be prohibited by law. So at any time, soldiers are not allowed to go into the homes of civilians or private citizens. Now, a lot of people don't know that this is connected to President Kennedy because President Kennedy served in the U.S. Naval Reserve from 1941 to 1945 and was seen as a war hero during World War II. So he was a soldier in World War II. But because of the Third Amendment, soldiers like President Kennedy are prohibited by the government to be housed in any civilian homes. The Fourth Amendment, it's important to understand. I see someone has a really good question. It says, so does that mean that security at airport is essentially non-constitutional because of the Second Amendment? That's a good question. Not necessarily, because we do have rights, but our rights cannot cause other people harm. So for example, we do have freedom of speech, but it can't be freedom of speech that's hate speech, or it can't be freedom of speech that is like threatening someone. So although we have rights, there are limitations to these rights for purposes of safety. That's a great question, Tyler. Let's go on to the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects Americans from unreasonable searches and seizures. This is really crucial. It essentially states the right of the people to secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall be issued but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place by searched and the persons or things to be seized. Essentially, it says police, the government cannot come into your house, your car, search your things without a warrant or probable cause. Now, you might think, how does this connect to President Kennedy? Well, an affidavit for a search warrant was issued to Ruth Payne's Irving, Texas home. Who is Ruth Payne, you might ask? She was the landlord of Lee Harvey Oswald's wife. Yes, Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who assassinated the president, was married and had children. His wife, Marina Oswald, and children lived with Payne, Marina Oswald's friend, at the time of the assassination. So in order for them to search for the home, they'd have to get access to the home with the warrant. Here's the affidavit, an image of the affidavit itself. And also, just so you guys are aware, any of the images that I'm showing you are a part of our collections here at the 6th Floor Museum. Here's the Fifth Amendment, the protection of rights to life, liberty, and property. Okay, the Fifth Amendment has a lot going on. No person shall be held to answer for capital, or otherwise infamous crimes unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, in the militia, military, when in actual service in time or war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life and limb. Essentially, you can't have double jeopardy. Nor shall be compelled in any crime case to be a witness against himself. You cannot incriminate yourself. Okay, that's why people say, I plead the Fifth, because they're pleading to the Fifth Amendment. Nor shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So there's a lot of things happening with the Fifth Amendment. The government's allowed to take your home to make a freeway or something, as long as they pay you for it. If someone is arrested, they are allowed due process, meaning they're supposed to give you your day in court. You don't have to incriminate yourself, and you should not be tried twice for the same crime. Now, this image here, as you see, is the grand jury that was assembled for Jack Ruby. What's important to remember is Lee Harvey Oswald never went to trial. If anybody can remember, you can type it in the chat. Why do you think Lee Harvey Oswald never went to trial? Let's see if you guys remember. The grand jury in this image, helps enforce the Fifth Amendment, and they were the group to determine the validity of the accusations against Jack Ruby, who was the Dallas nightclub owner that shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And Oswald was the man that assassinated President Kennedy. Edgewood, good job. Yes, the reason that Lee Harvey Oswald did not go to trial is because he was shot. Okay, so we'll take a brief pause here. We've covered 5 amendments, and I want you guys to be able to either discuss as a group, however your teacher would like this to happen. You can write this down, you can type it in the chat, whatever you prefer. Which amendment do you feel is the most important today out of the first 5 that we were able to discuss? Additionally, which amendment do you feel is the least important today? Again, out of the first 5 that we were able to discuss. I'll give you guys a minute or 2 for that, because I'm not sure if your teacher wants you to talk about it as a group, or you can just write it down or put it in the chat.
Edgewood, go ahead. Edgewood, you can go ahead.
You guys are good to go ahead, Edgewood.
First, Second Amendment is most useful because then if there isn't a Second Amendment, then people can just shoot each other, and then there'll be lots of murder. And Third Amendment is the least.
Thank you so much for that feedback, Edgewood. I have a couple of folks typing in online as well. It says the First Amendment is the most important, and the third is the least important. I have someone else stating that the Second Amendment is the most important, and the Third Amendment is the least important. We are seeing a bit of a pattern. We have most people saying that the Third Amendment is the least important. And as of right now, since we don't have to deal with, the quartering of troops, it makes sense. Yes, Edgewood, you are good to speak.
I believe that the First Amendment is the most important, and the Third Amendment is the least important. The First Amendment is the most important because, well, yeah, people need rights. And the third is the least important because, yeah, people should be able to house troops.
Yeah, so a lot of people are in agreement with you. We have a number of other people saying that the Third Amendment is the least important, and one other person saying that the First Amendment is most important. Good job. Go ahead, Edgewood.
I think the Third Amendment is the least important. It's just because we're not in war. And then the first one is important because if we couldn't say what we want, then we wouldn't be a free country, and it'd be a lot of different things than how we live today. And religion, we couldn't go and practice our beliefs where we want and when we want. So it would just change our lifestyle completely.
Yeah, that's a great point. It would change the lifestyle of us as Americans. Go ahead.
I think that the Fifth Amendment is the most important because life and liberty is really important.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I will say, if anyone, let's see, now I don't expect you guys to know this, but do you guys know where the American government got that idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of property or happiness? Edwin?
Declaration of Independence?
Yes, that's true. It comes from that. But then do we know where our declaration got it from? If you guys are not aware, that's okay. There is a famous British philosopher. We got it from the British, y'all, because you guys remember when the colonists first came over, they were British, named John Locke. Okay, so if you guys want to know more about that, a lot of our American philosophy of our government comes from folks like John Locke. Oh, thank you, Salem Lutheran School. Good job. All right. So let's go on to the Sixth Amendment. You guys ready? All right, the Sixth Amendment is the right of accused persons in criminal cases. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right of a speedy trial and a public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district where the crime was committed, which district shall have been previously asserted by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel in his defense. Essentially, the Sixth Amendment is saying you have the right to a lawyer, you have the right to know what the crime is against you, you have the right to know who's a witness against you, and you have the right to a speedy trial. by jury. Now, since we know the only person who went to trial in connection with Kennedy was Jack Ruby, this was the notebook that Wayman Rose wrote in as he served on as a juror in the Jack Ruby trial. The Seventh Amendment is essentially the same as the Sixth, but this time it's the rights in civil cases. The major difference in a civil case versus a criminal case is a criminal case means the law was broken. A civil case means there's an argument amongst independent civilians. Essentially says in suits of common law, the value of controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial of jury shall be preserved. Essentially saying if you are suing somebody for the value of something that's more than $20, you have the right to trial by jury. And no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of common law. Again, the people cannot be retried. The case cannot be retried. And in connection to that, we have this particular local civil suit, again, tied to Oswald. This Dallas Morning News article from February 25th, 1969, titled "The U.S. Jury Set Value of Zero on Oswald's Rifle," describes how a man named John King sued the government, essentially, requesting payment for the gun, the rifle of Lee Harvey Oswald. And you might think, wait, why does he want to get paid for this gun? That's because after Oswald used the gun, shot the president, the police took the gun, his wife sold the gun and said, hey, when I get this gun back from the police, you can have it. She sold it to a man named John King. Now the police said, no, this is a part of a federal investigation instead of just a local investigation. We can't give it to you. So he sued and said, I want this gun back. And they're like, I'm sorry, it does not belong to you. She sold you something that she could not provide you. So it shows that they set the value of the rifle as zero. So they didn't owe him anything. The Eighth Amendment is no excessive bail, fines, punishment is allowed. And it states, excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel or unusual punishment inflicted. Basically, for example, if someone is driving and they get a ticket, that ticket cannot be excessive or too much. This is the bail bonds card. A bail bonds is folks who will, if somebody goes to jail, they will pay to bail you out, essentially pay the court to get you out of jail. This bail bonds card was a piece of evidence collected from Jack Ruby's car, and he was arrested and taken to the Dallas County District Attorney's Office by the Dallas police for shooting and killing Lee Harvey Oswald. The Ninth Amendment is pretty vague, and this is what's used often today to support, anything that's not covered by the Constitution. Essentially, it says any additional rights that the Constitution does not mention, you might still have. So it mentions the enumeration of the Constitution in certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Essentially saying just because you don't have, the Constitution doesn't say you don't have the right to, breathe and eat and things like that, doesn't mean that you don't have those rights. It's just that they're not listed in the Constitution. And an example of this that a lot of people use, again, that since that's so vague, people interpret it in many ways, is this poster here that says, "We demand full employment now." Some people in the 1960s protested because they felt that not a lot of people had jobs and everybody should be guaranteed a job, and it's covered by the Ninth Amendment. This poster was carried in the March on Washington on August 28th, 1963. Does anyone know what the March on Washington was? It's okay if you don't. If you do, you can type in the chat or you can speak up. Go ahead, Edgewood.
It marks like how like all people should be treated equally no matter what they look like or who they are.
Yes, absolutely. It was the march that was led by Martin Luther King Jr. at Washington, and that's where he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And this was one of the posters that was used in that march. Okay. Now, you might consider, how is MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., connected to the president? Well, President Kennedy also wanted, he also wanted everyone to have equal rights. So after the March on Washington, President Kennedy met with Martin Luther King Jr. because he agreed with him. This particular sign advocates for the right of full employment, equal pay, although it's not mentioned in the Constitution. Some people interpret that this is also protected under the 9th Amendment. And last but not least is the 10th Amendment. It basically says that states have rights, and the powers that are not designated by the federal government are state powers. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to states respectively or to the people. This is very important because for the most part, yes, we have rights as a state, but if the federal government makes a law, then everyone has to follow that law. If the federal government does not make a law about something, then each individual state can make their own laws. And that is particularly connected to the case investigation against Oswald. The Dallas Police Department was originally in charge of the investigation. Now, keep in mind, it was the assassination of a president. So it seems like it might be a federal crime. But initially, the Dallas Police Department was originally in charge. However, the Secret Service, because it became a federal crime, took over. So with that, I will ask you the same questions that I asked before. Which amendment do you feel is the most important today out of the 6th through 10th Amendment? And which do you think is the least important? I'll give you guys a few minutes. Edgewood, you're good to speak.
The First Amendment I think is the most important because it still gives like the freedom to speak and the freedom of religion. But I believe that the 9th Amendment is the least important because it's like basic things that aren't said in the amendment are given right there, but they like don't have to be said in the amendment. It's just like common knowledge that you should that like you're able to do it.
Yeah, you make a great point, Edgewood. I will say though, common sense isn't always common. Tyler brings up a great point. He says the 6th is the most important and the 9th is the least. We also have some Lutherans saying that the most important is the 10th because without the federal government, without that, the federal government would be in charge of everything. Yeah, for the 10th Amendment, the federal government technically is in charge of everything if they want to be. If they don't want to be, then it's left up to the states. So I think without the 10th Amendment, you're absolutely right. States wouldn't have as much of a say in their laws. Edgewood, go ahead.
I believe the 8th Amendment is the most important because if people charge you too much fine or money, then it will be a huge problem. for the people, and then people would want to, well, at least move to the place more or less. And the ninth is the least because, well, I forgot why it's the least important.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I think the eighth is most important because they could give you like super harsh punishments for doing a little thing. Like if you park in the wrong spot, you could be fined more than you should be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if it wasn't for the Eighth Amendment, if someone gets a parking ticket, it could be $1,000 fine. But because of the Eighth Amendment, it requires it to be not, a crazy amount. All right, now, seeing that this is the last slide, I hope you guys have been able to make those connections with President Kennedy and with the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is not just relevant in the 1960s or when this country was first founded, but it's very relevant today and for a lot of different reasons. Do you guys have any questions or any comments about the Bill of Rights or about President Kennedy? Or do you have questions for me about the museum itself or about the assassination of President Kennedy?
Well, it looks like we have one in the chat here. How long did Jack Ruby spend in jail?
That's a really good question. I don't know exactly how long he spent in jail, but I do know he died in jail from a pulmonary embolism because he had lung cancer. Edgewood?
Why was Kennedy killed?
That is the $1 million question. We don't know because the person who killed him, what happened to him? He also was shot, so that we never had an opportunity to ask him. Do you guys have any other questions? Any thoughts? Anything that leaves you curious, maybe about any of the amendments? Good question. Why did Ruby kill Oswald? Ruby stated that what he told the jury was that he killed him because he was trying to care about the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, because he thought the fact that she was widowed and her husband was killed was enough suffering for her, and he didn't want her to have to deal with the suffering of the trial and have to be on the stand because she witnessed the murder of her husband. She was sitting right next to him. Good question. What happened to Lee Harvey Oswald's family? Lee Harvey Oswald's family continued on. He had 2 kids and a wife, and there is, if you're interested in that, there's an entire documentary made about Lee Harvey Oswald, whether he was guilty or not, and his children speak in that documentary. You might want to Google it. Edgewood, are any of the conspiracy theories real? Well, if we knew if they were real, there wouldn't be conspiracy theories, now would they? But there are a lot of conspiracy theories. Many people feel that there were multiple shooters. Many people feel that it wasn't Oswald. Some people feel that maybe it was the government was trying to, like it was targeted and Oswald got framed for it. We don't have evidence of any of this, but the museum does highlight these theories. Have any members of the Kennedy's family ever visited the museum? That's a good question. Now you have to consider that our museum, the 6th Floor Museum, is specifically targeting the idea of his assassination. So this could be a very emotional place for them. I do know that, I'm not sure which member, but in the past, a member of his family has visited, but again, it is not the same thing for them. It's like visiting a place where a family member of yours was killed. So it's a very emotional thing for them. And so their perception of the museum is very different than the public. So for us, we're interested in the case, we're interested in the conspiracy theories. For them, it's more emotional. How old was Kennedy when he died? That's a great question. He was very young. He was 46 years old. And he had little kids.
Edgewood, did you have a question? You can go ahead and talk.
Yeah, is anybody related to the Kennedy family still alive?
Yes. President Kennedy's daughter is still alive. Any
It looks like, is the museum owned privately or publicly?
That's a good question. We are a nonprofit. But that being said, most museums are not necessarily publicly owned or necessarily fully privatized. And that's because they're nonprofit organizations. That's a great question. I'm not sure how old his daughter is, but I think she's somewhere in her 50s. She's a much older person now.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I just want to thank everybody for coming. We really appreciate you attending. And thanks, Zabaria. Thank you so much for taking your time to share all your wisdom and all this great information. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much.